So with that, he's ready to stand up. He's tired of listening to me. And he's going to really get you fired up. Here's Jim Hightower.
Thank you. This is terrific to be here. To start off with Truck Stop Souvenir, a wonderful group that puts the music to the message. You know, musicians not only get it, but they sing it. They make it possible for us to absorb it. This is the 100th anniversary of Woody Guthrie's birth this year. And Truck Stop is very much in those footsteps. You know, Woody, if we brought Woody back, he would not have to write a single new verse. He could use that verse from Pretty Boy Floyd the Outlaw that says, through this world I travel, I see lots of funny men. Some will rob me of the six gun, and some with the fountain pen. It's fountain pens who are doing the serious stealing in our society, and Woody knew that. The Truck Stop Souvenirs do as well. And I want to add my thanks to Diane Rosenberg. You know, we've got a saying over in East Texas that the rooster crows, but the hen delivers the goods. Jim Rubis, your president, a terrific job that he is doing. Got to know him just a little bit here tonight. He's driving me to the airport tomorrow morning, so I'm going to get an overdose of Jim. But, Oscar Wilde said, "Be yourself, everyone else is already taken." I think that would be Jim Rubis right there. And thanks to Chris Bush for the pitch that he made. We're going to say a little bit more about that later. And thanks also to KRUU and James Moore Independent Community Radio. That's what makes a difference in our world, in our society. Just makes me happier to flee at the dog show to be standing up here. Looking out at all you fantastic Jay Fanners, you grassroots champions of common sense and common good, you corporate greed whackers and CAFO butt kickers, you agitators for America's founding values of economic fairness, social justice, equal opportunity for all people. That's what America represents right there. That's what JFAS stands for. This is not the presidential debate here tonight, but it is a discussion that both contenders for the presidency ought to be having. They ought to be talking about this, and I'm guessing that they will not here tonight. Might not even mention agriculture or farmers. So it's a joy for me, and I thank you for allowing the scruffy Texas populace to come in here to Fairfield without having me dip to the border first. That was a generous move on your part. But joy for me to join you as you strategize, organize, harmonize, energize, and mobilize for another year of your inspiring efforts to battle the forces of arrogance and avarice and to raise common sense to high places. So I've come these many miles here from Austin, Texas, and not just to say thank you, but to thank you especially for doing the work of democracy, for having the guts and the gumption to confront the greedheads and the boneheads who feel entitled these days to run roughshod over their neighbors, to run roughshod over our communities, our air, our water, our children's health, our democratic rights. They get to thinking they're the top dogs, and we're just a bunch of fire hydrants, you know, out here in the countryside. Mentioned that I came from Austin, Texas, but I don't just come from Austin, I come from South Austin, Texas. And over on the south side, we got a little different attitude there. A little insouciant. Our unofficial slogan on the south side is, "We're all here because we're not all there." And I think that's why we're all here tonight, because the powers that be, the boss hogs of the CAFO assault on Iowa, and look at those maps out there in the corridor before you get out of here. Astonishing to see the clusters of those CAFOs, the boss hogs of that CAFO assault. Not all there on those essential values of fairness and justice, or on the common concepts of good stewardship and just plain old good neighborliness. When it comes to grasping that basic American ideal that we're all in this together, the Smithfields and the Cargills and the Presages, the CAFO developers and their political enablers are as confused as goats on astroturf. Now, I know from my own experience, it's not easy to take on the moneyed elites, as you good folks have been doing. Here, you get the feeling like that guy that B.B. King sings about. Nobody likes you but your mama, and she might be jiving you too. Did you ever get the feeling like that? It's not easy to do what you're doing, but it is essential. If America is ever to achieve those ideals that we set forth from the start of fairness and justice, opportunity for all, it's essential that we're ever going to live in the kind of world that we want. Patti Smith, the great rocker, has that wonderful song, "People have the power to dream, to rule, to wrestle the world from fools." That's what we're engaged in, right there. Woodrow Wilson, when he was president, first moved down to Washington, said, if you want to make enemies, try to change something. Well, all you're trying to change is big ag's quick profit scheme to industrialize, conglomeratize, Wall Streetize, plasticize, monopolize, and denaturalize the raising of livestock. You don't need an IQ much higher than room temperature to see that what these animal factories are doing works only for the profiteering few, the corporate chieftains and the big investors. They get the gold mine and the rest of us get the shaft. Rather than understanding or even caring that good agriculture is the art and science of cooperating with nature, rather than always trying to overwhelm nature. The agribusiness interests, they seem to think that if brute force isn't working, it's probably because you're not using enough of it. This wonderful book here that's being distributed, not only here tonight, but across this state by this great organization. I mean, you know, they say a picture's worth 1,000 words. Well, here's 1,000 pictures in here. And turn to about, page 17, 18, I'm not sure what it is there, but look at the laying hen thing in there. And then flip over to the hogs and flip over to the cattle. And you see confined swine, what this is all about. Anyone who's been inside one of these places, and I have, knows that they are indeed brutish. If you ever wonder why the chicken crossed the road, it was to get out of this place. Then there are those of you living next door, downwind, downstream. I don't need to tell JFAN members about it. You are living it. Yet the industrialists keep saying, well, there are no problems, really. It's just kind of all in your head. They're perfectly safe. Well, 3 words. Exploding hog barns. I mean, you don't need to be in who's who to know what's what, do you? I mean, that is a problem. Exploding hog barns, that's a problem. So, question 1 here tonight is, how did we get in this mess? How did we get here? And the answer is one word. Politics. Politics. We the people. Over the last 30, 40 years, we kind of kicked back in the lazy boy, doing 12-ounce elbow bends. Not paying a whole lot of attention to food policy, or noticing that policy was being hijacked by corporate lobbyists and lawyers and economists. People who could not run a watermelon stand if we gave them the melons and had the highway patrol flag down the customers for them. They were in charge of food policy. And this is what they created. In the name of farmers But you know, an immediate result of this industrialized agricultural vision was that our nation began losing hundreds of thousands of farmers, good, productive, efficient, invaluable farming families. I was here in Iowa back in the 1980s, as Jim indicated. I was elected ag commissioner, much to the amusement of the people of Texas, for a couple of terms back there during that time of the tractor caves and the farm rebellion. And I was out here in Iowa, and a guy came up to me, a farmer came up to me and said, "You know the difference between a farmer and a pigeon?" And I said, "No." And he said, "Well, a pigeon can still make a deposit on a John Deere." So you see where I got my education. But the ag establishment back then snapped, "Well, we don't need farmers. We don't need them. Agriculture is no longer a way of life," said Earl Butz. "It's a business. The family farm is an anachronism whose time has simply come. It's natural. It's inevitable. It's the demise of an old one." Well, as we say out in Lubbock, bovine excrement. This has not been a gentle passing. It's been a mugging of family farms by Wall Street speculators, corporate profiteers, and their political hirelings. We can go way back on this. Eisenhower's Secretary of Agriculture, Ezra Taft Benson, "Farmers need the spur of the insecurity." Here we go to Earl Butz. "This trend toward less farms is not bad. This releases people to do something useful in our society." Wouldn't you like to buy him for what he's worth and sell him for what he thinks he's worth? Here's a product line. Ronald Reagan. "My farm program hasn't hurt anybody. No one has been thrown out in the snow to die." There's a high standard, isn't it? Jimmy Carter. "Many of you will not make it, but it will be better for those of you who survive." Right on down the line. George W.'s idea of a good farm program was hee-haw. And yet it still goes on. We've got economists, continuing today, economists saying there are still too many farmers. U.S. Department of Agriculture, by the way, today no longer refers to farmers, they refer to agricultural practitioners. This is why John Kenneth Galbraith once said, "If all economists were laid end to end, it would be a good thing." Earl Butz was right in one phase. Earl Butz said agriculture is a business. It most certainly is a business. But it is a good business because it is a way of life. That's why people farm. That's the value that we, as a larger society, get out of people who go out there in nature and try to cooperate with it. It does encompass business, but it's bigger than that. Also encompassing an understanding of nature, of mechanics, of art, music, science, ingenuity, community, cooperation, teaching, duct tape, baling wire, and a little bit of voodoo. Successful family farmers don't merely know the agri part of agriculture, they also know the cultural part of agriculture. That's essential to it being a good business, to it being a productive business, to it being something that's worthy of our support. Recent interview in a magazine asked an organic farmer over in Iowa what he'd be if he wasn't a farmer. And he said, "Disappointed." So my message to you, and I'm sure you're wondering what it is that the powers that be won't do it for us. They're the ones doing it to us. Your own Environmental Protection Commission, for example, 9-0 vote recently to okay a CAFO expansion of 5,000 more hogs, without even considering the specifics of the people's complaint against that addition. One of the commissioners, Brent Restetter, whined that he felt put upon by even having to consider the people's case. I hear a guy like that and I think, 100,000 sperm and you were the fastest? As always, throughout American history, we the people have to do the heavy lifting of democracy from the grassroots level, not trickle-down economics, which has now become tinkle-down economics, but percolate-up economics. We have to take the power ourselves. We have to make the change. And this has happened throughout our history. And we've made great progress. That's something they don't teach in history class or government classes anymore, but we made tremendous progress in this country because of ordinary folks just like you who dare to stand up in groups like J. Fan. The cynics will tell you, well, it's impossible. Forget it, it can't even be done. Corporations have all the power, they got all the money, they got the media, they got the politicians. We can't win. But as a friend of mine who's been a pioneer in the organic movement put it, said, Hightower, those who say it can't be done should not interrupt those who are doing it. That would be you. This is why J-Fan is so important. They got the fat cats, but we got the alley cats. A lot more of us out there. Now, the first job of a citizen is to keep your mouth open. And we're pretty good at that. But it helps if that mouth is attached to a brain. And that's where J-Fan comes in. This organization has the information, you've got the connections, you've got the experience, you've got the strategies to connect that brain power to mouth power, which then connects to foot power that produces political power. That's the way it works. It's pretty straightforward. I think of groups like J-Fan in terms of a little hardware store that's near my home in Austin. A little bitty place, about half the size of this hall right here, called Harold's Hardware. Great place though. You don't have to buy the whole box of nails. They'll sell you 2 nails, and that's what it is you need. And they'll say, well, what are you trying to do? And I said, well, I'm trying to build a lectern. And well, let's pencil it out here and see what you need. They'll loan you a tool. You take a tool home and bring it back. And the slogan of Harold's Hardware is, together, we can do it yourself. That's got to be our slogan, doesn't it? But we can't do it ourselves. But together we can. And look at what J-Fan is doing. In your newsletter that was sent to me here, the great success up in Dallas County, defeating that 5,000 hog CAFO up there in a very innovative way, by the way. Rick Hartman, a CSA farmer who was right up against the CAFO that was going to go in, said we were all rather small as individuals, but became a mountain standing on each other's shoulders. That's the truth. When we stand together, we become a power. And that's the only way we can be a power. It's the only way we've ever been a power. And that's why this organization is driving the CAFOs and the right-wing politicians crazy. Of course, that's a pretty short ride for a lot of them. So I'm here just to say, keep on keeping them. Only more so. You got a bunch coming up, as Jim was reading off there. You got this EPA public meeting on CAFOs coming up on the 18th of this very month. I think that's next Thursday, 7 p.m. over in Des Moines. Be there. That's an important meeting. You're going to send a message right there. We got Prop 37 out in California against GMOs. For the group here that's part of the Move to Amend organization all across the country, a coalition to take Citizen United out of politics, to take the corporate money out. Be a part of that effort. They've got a meeting right here in Fairfield on the 11th at the public library. Just keep on keeping on, only more so. And keep forming those coalitions. That's what you've done so brilliantly. It's not just your own organization, but you reach out to CCI. What a great grassroots organization that is. Been in ours for 37 years. The EIP group that involves enforcement officers, former enforcement officers out of the Environmental Protection Agency and other environmental agents. Sierra Club, that has just forever been right there in the face of how, and on and on. There's so many groups. Reach out to those evangelical environmentalists. Yes, there is such a thing, evangelical environmentalists. They don't call themselves environmentalists, they call themselves creation carers. Who cares what they call themselves? It's the same thing. Get out there. Reach out to these communities that sometimes we reject. Don't reject anybody. Don't reject anybody who wants to stand up for what is right and what is just, for economic fairness and social justice. They're on our side, and we together are on each other's side. As Jesse Jackson put it years ago, he said, we might not all have come over on the same boat, but we're in the same boat now. And be creative about it, as you have been, JFAN has been, that Dallas County effort that was made up there, the Mother's Day card that they had all the mothers and grandmothers signed and sent to the wife of the guy who was going to build the CAFO. Touched her heart, apparently, and she touched his heart and said, we're not going to do it. We're not going to build it. That's creative. I was with a group over in North Carolina, and they had led to the public financing of their public utility elections over there, judicial elections in North Carolina. And the way they won that at the last moment in the legislature, it was not an initiative. They had to win it through the legislature. And the way they won it was they had the teachers call their former students who were in the legislature and say, Johnny, don't make me have to come to Raleigh. So be thinking like that. Thinking, who can touch these people? You've got some of your own county commissioners just voting willy-nilly against you. I think we need a hog calling contest around their houses. Call them out. Suey. Come on. And one more thing, you just got to persevere. We don't win the first time out. Sometimes we don't win the second, third, or fourth time out. The great suffragists, the Elizabeth Cady Stanton and the rest of them who led that great fight, beginning in the 1840s, none of them ever lived to vote. Not a single one of them ever cast a ballot. But they created a movement that 70 years later led to the ability of women in this country to vote. We're in a continuum. We're in a long haul for democracy. As my friend Willie Nelson put it to me once, he said, Hightower, the early bird might get the worm, but it's the second mouse that gets the cheese. So it means a lot about Willie. I don't know what it means. But most of all, I'd say to you, trust yourselves, trust your neighbors, trust your values, and support this organization, JFAN. I just want to echo Chris Bush's pitch there. You're not going to get this funded from any kind of corporation. You're not going to get this funded from manna on heaven. This comes from us. So put your little dab in, whether it's $5 or $25. I see a few lawyers out there. You've got $1,000 in your pocket. Come on. Turn it loose. Put it in here. It's your organization. It's nobody else's. And you don't want it to be anybody else's. There's another little entity, a little motel right down the road from my home. An old Austin motel called the Austin Motel, and it has an iconic marquee in front of it. And it's got on that marquee, it says, no additives, no preservatives, corporate free since 1938. That's what you want to be corporate free. Because when you tie into that, you tie into something ugly. So you've got to be the supporter of your own effort. And mainly, just keep pushing. I'll leave you with this. I understand we're going to have time for some questions and comments and insights from y'all. This is from old Aunt Eula. She was a farmer over in Fannin County, Texas, up on the Oklahoma border. And something big had happened there in Fannin County when I was but a boy in the late 1940s. And that was that the WPA had happened. The New Deal had happened. And suddenly there was electricity in that county, in the rural areas, on the farm that Eula had. A power line went in there, and what that meant to her was she could put a pump in the creek and move water into her house for the first time ever. Never had water in the house. And so there it was. And so I was there one time, I was but a boy, and that was a problem. Because the men were standing over the sink and looking at it, and it was all murky and muddy coming out, and the men were scratching their butts and saying, I don't know, what do you think's going on here? And Eula turned to me and she said, Jim, the water won't ever clear up until we get the hogs out of the creek. Now right there's our problem, isn't it? The hogs are in the creek. And they're fouling our economic, political, and environmental waters. And you don't get a hog out of the creek by saying, here hog, here hog. You got to shove that hog out of the creek. That is what JFAN represents. Thank you for what you're doing. Keep pushing the hog out of the creek.
When all hippies need a cell phone revolution start on Facebook, all it takes is a flip of a switch. And when all you need is money, the government won't need a draft, cause you'll volunteer to murder from the ditch. Did you know when they build prisons that they base the number on the amount of fourth grade minority boys fail at school?